Hello, welcome to Eye on Africa here on France 24. I'm Yuko Itade. Here are the top stories. Sudan nears nearly 3 years of war with no end in sight, the country marking the grim anniversary of a conflict that has claimed tens of thousands of lives and displaced around 12 million people. Pope Leo XIV gears up to embark on the second leg of his Africa tour, visiting Cameroon. The pontiff wrapping up his historic visit to Algeria, following the footsteps of his spiritual father, St. Augustine, Tuesday. A school in Kenya offers teenage mothers a second chance. The one-of-a-kind facility lets young girls continue their education while caring for their children. The school, free of stigma, aims to break the cycle of exclusion. Welcome to the program. Sudan is preparing to mark exactly 3 years since the country collapsed into a brutal civil war. Since the power struggle erupted on April the 15th, 2023, between the Sudanese army and the paramilitary rapid support forces, Sudan has been gripped by one of the world's worst humanitarian crises. Tens of thousands of people have been killed and around 12 million displaced. With the country effectively split at the moment between the two warring parties, fears of a formal partition playing out are mounting. The World Food Programme in Sudan is trying to curb the hunger crisis. Its director says providing aid there is still a challenge. Take a listen.
3 years of war in Sudan have created the world's largest humanitarian crisis. The conflict has ravaged livelihoods, uprooted communities, and driven millions of people into hunger. Famine still stalks parts of this country. Aid workers, trucks and warehouses continue to come under attack, putting the lives of our colleagues at risk and disrupting our assistance. Yet for millions of people here in Sudan, WFP is the only lifeline.
We're going to try and break down what the situation is like now in Sudan 3 years on with Nicholas Westcott. He is a former British diplomat and the professor of practice in diplomacy at SOAS University of London. Thanks so much for joining us on the programme, Nicholas. We're now 3 years in now. It's a grim milestone for Sudan. Do you see any end in sight?
It's very hard to see one at the moment. It has to be remembered, although other crises have taken the headlines, remains the world's worst humanitarian disaster. I mean, of 45 million people in the country, 33 million of those need humanitarian aid. And again, half of those are physically displaced out of their homes. Khartoum, the capital, has been effectively reduced to ruins. Nobody is moving back there. So it's very hard to see any imminent end. Efforts have been made for some time. The fall of President Bashir, the former dictator, was brought about by popular protests. But a power-sharing agreement that was reached between the civilian and the military rulers with international help broke down in about 2021, 22, and the next year a civil war broke out between the two rival generals, both of whom were convinced that they could secure control by military means of the whole country. And the civil war has continued since then. A large part of the problem being that international engagement has tended towards propping up one side or the other, rather than trying to bring them together in a reconciliation process. Until that changes, the war will continue.
Well, we'll definitely touch on the more proxy war aspect of things and how that's helping the conflict, how it's helping to fuel the conflict. I do want to ask you about the issue of a formal partition. We're seeing that the country is effectively divided between the Sudanese army and the rapid support forces. Sudanese army controlling the north, east and centre of Sudan, while the paramilitary rapid support forces are dominating Darfur and Kordofan. Talk to us about whether you see the country potentially splitting formally here. How likely is that scenario?
As you say, after 3 years of war, neither side has managed to get military superiority. The situation was a bit more fluid for a while, but after the RSF seized control of El Fasher, the last outpost of Sudan Armed Forces control in Darfur, effectively the two areas are now distinct and separate. And warfare has tended to shift from fighting on the ground to drone warfare. And we see both sides now deploying a lot of drones and not really trying to shift the front line, except down in the south in Kordofan, as you say, on the border with South Sudan over towards Ethiopia. And there the RSF continue trying to seize land from the SAF. But in the center of the country, from Khartoum up to the northeast, Port Sudan, that's all fairly firmly under SAF control, including the Nile Valley. And I can't see any prospect of the RSF really making inroads there. So it's turned into a military stalemate, in effect.
Well, we've seen that China, Iran, Russia, Saudi Arabia and the UAE have openly taken sides in this conflict. We've had allegations of the UAE actually pumping money and weapons to help the RSF. How much attention or how much involvement do you see the UAE actually having practically, with so much focus now being on the war and the situation in the Middle East?
Yeah, the Iran-US war, effectively the third Gulf War, is obviously distracting attention of many of the protagonists or the external actors in this war, but it also makes the war in South Sudan even more important in regional terms because Sudan borders the Red Sea. So up to now, Egypt and Saudi Arabia have tended to support the Sudan armed forces, even though they have quite a strong Islamist Muslim Brotherhood element to them. And the UAE, which is the most firmly anti-Muslim Brotherhood, has been strongly supporting Hemeti, General Hemeti and the RSF. The evidence for that is circumstantial but overwhelming. A lot of the supplies come down through Libya, through Chad, and to the RSF forces there. It's quite well catalogued by media reports. So it's quite clear that that support is continuing, and relations between Saudi Arabia and the UAE on this issue in Sudan don't appear to be getting any better, even while at the Persian Gulf end of things, they are trying to work together to reopen the Straits of Hormuz. So, you know, both countries, it's quite complicated. They're friends on one side and enemies in Sudan. And that appears to be a situation. The US have been trying to bring all these key parties together in a group called the Quad, which is the US, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and UAE. And that was beginning to make a little bit of progress, but it depends entirely on the US providing the impetus. And now the US is totally focused on the Iran conflict, and therefore little effort is being put into trying to reconcile the two sides in Sudan.
Nicholas, thank you so much for giving us your insight on this. Thank you for joining us on the programme today.
Thank you.
We're going to move on now. Pope Leo XIV has wrapped up the second and final day of his landmark visit to Algeria. The pontiff was in the city of Annaba Tuesday, following the footsteps of his spiritual father, St. Augustine, a giant of the early church. The Pope also didn't miss a chance to lead Mass before hundreds of faithful in the Basilica of St. Augustine. The day also saw the Pope make a stop at the Little Sisters of the Poor Shelter, a facility in Annaba. France 24's Claire Bacalin was following the Pope's visit to the Basilica. She sent us this update on day 2.
This is the last stop on the Pope's visit to Algeria. He's inside the Basilica just behind me right now, the Basilica of St. Augustine here in Annaba, celebrating Mass with local Catholics, but also members of the clergy who've come from various different African countries to celebrate Mass with the Pope. Tuesday, he visited an archaeological site nearby the Basilica. This is, of course, where the bishop lived and died. He died in the year 430, and the Pope is a member of the Order of St. Augustine. So this is a very important moment for the Pope on a spiritual and personal level. After the Mass is finished, the Pope will continue on his African tour. He will go straight to the airport and he will head to Cameroon, Angola, and Equatorial Guinea.
Well, as we were just mentioning, the Pope is now gearing up to leave Algeria to fly to Cameroon, the second leg of the Pontiff's Africa tour. It's set to be a packed itinerary for Leo, now the third pontiff to set foot on Cameroonian soil. Well, during his stay, he'll make stops in Yaoundé, the capital, Douala, the economic hub, and Bamenda, the capital of the northwest region. It's been gripped by a socio-political crisis for a decade. Meanwhile, Christians in Cameroon are steeped in anticipation for the Pope's visit. Our team on the ground sent us this report.
In some Roman Catholic churches, special prayers are being recited to prepare for Pope Leo's visit. At the Notre-Dame de Victoire Cathedral in Yaoundé, Catholic faithfuls like Danielle attend Mass daily as she awaits the coming of the sovereign pontiff.
The Pope's visit to Cameroon represents the arrival of Jesus. I personally received Jesus. When the Pope comes here, it's my joy. It's the joy of Cameroon.
Christians are in line to grab this fabric, specially designed on the occasion of the Pope's visit. Josiane had to pay 15,000 francs CFA to acquire a piece of the fabric.
I came to get fabric ahead of Pope Leo's visit to Cameroon. I'm going to sew a dress just like that of the Virgin Mary. By April the 15th, I'll be wearing my dress.
On the streets of Yaoundé, the Pope's visit is advertised on billboards. Cameroonians hope his presence will ease tensions and contribute to resolving the defense crisis facing the country.
We all hope that he will pray for this country to prosper, for good economic policy, especially that peace reigns in this country, so that the authorities will know that they are there to represent us.
Pope Leo XIV is expected in Cameroon on April 15th for a 3-day visit which will take him to Yaoundé, Douala and Bamenda.
And finally, we're heading to Kenya, where a school is working to prevent teenage mothers from dropping their studies. The boarding school is a one-of-a-kind facility in the country and offers young girls the opportunity to continue their education while caring for their children. Clemence Walla takes a look.
While their mothers are in class, these children are in daycare. They are among the 80 infants and toddlers living at this Kenyan boarding school designed for teenage mothers. Offering academic, psychological and social support, the school and its faculties strive to help their students balance their studies with their parental responsibilities.
The care that I receive here, the love, everything, I don't think I can get it out there because from what I know, what I've experienced out there, a lot of people used to judge me because I got pregnant while I'm in school.
We do counseling. I talk to them. I try to understand them. When you talk to them, you get to understand the child and the mother.
Kenyan law prohibits sexual relations with and between minors. Nevertheless, in 2024, the country recorded more than 125,000 pregnancies among teenage girls under the age of 19. Faced with rejection and stigmatization from their families and communities, making education accessible to teenage mothers is a challenge.
Every girl who gets pregnant and drops during their school time must be allowed re-entry to any school in the country, any school. That's really important. And these schools that are helping to close the equity gap must also be supported.
In fact, some students went on to pursue higher education to become civil servants, lawyers, and even doctors.
Well, that's it from all of us on the Eye on Africa team, but stay with us here on France 24.